You may have seen someone in the gym using a hack squat machine and strapping bands to it, and if you've been wondering why they're doing this or what's the purpose and how it works, this is the video for you. And if you don't have a hack squat machine, stick around until the end because I'm going to show you how to get a very similar setup using only bands at home. So you may or may not be familiar with a hack squat machine. This machine, it's actually a combination hack squat and leg press. So the hack squat is the position that I'm in right now. Your spine is basically parallel to the plane of motion. And as you can see, the plane of motion here, it runs up and down these rails, and I'm pushing on the platform with my feet. So you're basically simulating a squat, but you're in this kind of reclined position. And with a leg press, I would be inverted. So my back would be down on the bottom and it would be sitting flat on this platform, so it would be perpendicular to the direction of motion. So the hack squat machine basically fixes your path of motion and also supports your spine, so you don't have to worry about a lot of the lower back or any instability issues, and you can focus solely on training those leg muscles. And what it mostly focuses on is the quad area. And you can also target, you can change that up just by positioning your feet differently on the platform. All right, so how to target different muscles with the hack squat. To basically target more quads, you want your feet to be lower on the platform because what that's going to do is create more knee flexion as we slide down this pad. Now you'll notice that my heels start to pick up as I go down into this rep. So you want to get to that point where your heels stay flat on the platform in the lowest position. That's kind of the lowest that you want to go, but that will give you the most knee flexion and therefore tons of quad engagement. And now if you want to target more of the hamstrings and glutes, you just bring your feet up higher on the platform. That'll give you less knee flexion, and then when you're driving out of the bottom, you'll feel more engagement in your glutes and in your hamstrings. You'll also still have quads, obviously. And then in that center in between, you'll kind of get a good mix of both. And now also you can target kind of the inner and outer portions of your leg by moving your feet closer together. So the closer your feet are together, the more outer sweep of that quad they're gonna work on, and the further they are apart, and the further your toes are pointing apart, the more you are going to target that inner teardrop area of the quad muscle. So now that we went through the basics and the mechanics of this exercise and kind of how to adjust it based on your positioning, now we can talk about how to customize it with the use of resistance bands. So in this exercise, you're going to be doing this squat motion, and with a free weight on here, you have pretty much constant resistance all the way through the range of motion. And at the bottom, you're basically having to decelerate all of this weight and change directions and then re-accelerate it in the upward direction. And also, biomechanically, you put out different amounts of force at different positions. So I'm going to be a lot stronger in this top range of motion here, in this lockout phase, than I am going to be at this extreme knee flexion. I'm going to be a lot weaker here than I am up here where I'm squeezing my quads and locking out. So what we can do is add bands to basically change that resistance curve or resistance profile to better match the biomechanics of the exercise. All right, so there's a couple of different ways that you can attach bands to this sled, to this machine. And obviously every machine is going to be a little bit different, but the two main different ways are going to be going from the sled to the top of the device, which will subtract weight. The larger the band, the less the weight will be at the bottom. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you can attach from the sled down to the bottom of the machine, which will effectively be lighter at the bottom, but then as you push it up, that band is going to increase and add resistance at the top. So from the top down, it subtracts resistance from your free weights, and from the bottom up, if you hook the band to the bottom and up to the sled, it's going to add resistance to whatever you have on the sled. Both of them kind of act the same, where at the top of the rep, you're going to have the most load, and at the bottom of the rep, you're going to have the least load, but they're doing it in two different ways. Like I said, from the top down, when the band is actually pulling up on the sled, and from the bottom up, the band is actually pulling down on the sled. All right, so I'm going to show you how I typically hook up a band from the top down on this specific machine. And what I do is I use one 41-inch band, and I find a strong place on the sled to anchor it to where it's not going to get pinched. And on this machine, it's basically these handles, and then I basically bring this band down here and I wrap it right around the main support post here and back to the other handle. And it's probably going to be different for just about every hack squat machine out there, but you always want to make sure that whatever you're hooking your band to, one, it is a very sturdy portion of the machine. Like, you don't want to hook it up to one of the shoulder rest pads or something like that. Hook it up to something solid steel that's welded, and also the same thing for the anchor point on the top, something that's very solid and welded. And the other point is, you want to set the band up so that it's relatively loose or almost no tension at the top of the rep, and then also plenty of tension at the bottom of the rep. So that's another thing that you can customize with this. So you can change up the size of the band that you use, and you can also change up how much length that you're using to anchor this band, right? Because if I make it so that the band doesn't engage until I get halfway down the rep, versus if the band is engaging right away, that's going to change the resistance profile. And remember, from the top down, this band is going to be subtracting resistance from whatever the free weight is that you have on the sled. So now when I jump into this thing, obviously the band is pretty loose at the top. So I'm feeling the entire weight of the sled. And then as I drop down, that band starts to stretch and removes resistance, removes force from the sled. So it feels a lot lighter at the bottom. And it's also kind of like pulling me up out of the hole. And then right about here, it starts to lessen. I can feel a big decrease. And then I have full sled force here. So basically now, when I feel this with my quad muscles driving through the rep, the tension is a lot more similar throughout, and I'm able to get higher peak force at the top where my quads are the strongest, while still getting a good amount of force and the bottom here during my changeover. But what it's done is that band is actually pulling up and subtracting weight, so it's taken a lot of stress off my joints because I don't need to accelerate all that mass with my quads. That mass is actually being accelerated partially with the band and partially with my quads. So that's where the advantage is in this. You make it, it's more biomechanically efficient for the exercise. Now let's go through the bottom up method of how to add bands to the hack squat. So from the bottom up, you're going to be attaching the band somewhere down at the base of the frame, somewhere sturdy. And in this case, all I really have for an option here is this handle that's sticking out. So I'm going to put my band right around the handle here, making sure that it won't slide off, obviously, as we add tension to it. And then I'm going to string it up and hook it up to this handle up here, because that's something that's out of the way. It's not going to get pinched. It's not the most convenient, and you'll see why in a minute. So basically, I have to make sure that I route this out of the way of the locking feature on the leg press machine, obviously, because this is important, or the hack squat machine, leg press hack squat. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And now, Some people are probably wondering, well, do I need to put bands on both sides or just one side? And the answer is, it kind of depends. Like typically when you're loading up one of these machines, you want to do it evenly so that it doesn't bind on the way down. Some machines are better than others where you might not need to, or if you're not using a ton of band resistance, you might be able to get away with one side versus the other. But I typically just like to do both sides, keep it even, just like you put weights on both sides of the machine as well and keep it even. Even is always better than uneven, in my opinion. All right, so now I'm gonna jump in here and I'm gonna do a rep and I'm gonna kind of try to describe to you a little bit how it feels just so that you can understand what's going on. So, of course, at the top of this rep, I can feel peak resistance, and another thing that I feel is the band tension pulling me down. It pulls me down faster and harder than it would without the bands. And that has to do with gravitational acceleration, right? With free weights, all that's pulling down on them is gravitational acceleration. Now we've added an additional component of acceleration in the downward direction due to these bands. So this will fall faster if I let it go. So I noticed that right off the bat. And then as I drop down here, I can feel that resistance decreasing. And one thing you should notice is there's still, there's a little bit of tension down here. So I can feel that as opposed to before where all the tension was released and pulling, or all the tension was pulling up on the sled and it kind of wanted to pull me out of that hole. Now I still feel like I'm kind of like stuck in the hole and I got to drive myself out of this. And obviously as I'm driving myself out of this, it's getting more and more difficult all the way up. So these are definitely harder, I would say more difficult reps to do. But I would say if you were to put an equivalent free weight load, so if I just, instead of having these two purple bands, I would replace the purple bands with the equivalent in plates, I would say that the plate load would feel even heavier at the bottom and give me more stress on my knees. So if I had to rank the three loads, I would say the band assistance gives me the least stress on my knees. This gives me the second most stress on my knees. And then a heavy free weight load would give me by far the most stress on my knees. Okay, so now we've showed you how to add resistance to the sled with bands and subtract resistance from the sled with bands. And with that, there's tons of customization that you can do. You can use different size bands. You can use different lengths, whether you have them folded in half or singly stretched, or different attachment points on the hack squat machine itself. Ultimately, it's going to come down to a little bit of experimentation on your end to kind of optimize the reps and the setups to get what you need. But ultimately what I typically shoot for is so that you have that feeling of constant resistance throughout the rep. Like the whole rep should feel like a grinding rep. It shouldn't be easier on one portion and harder on another. That's why we're adding these bands, is so that we can keep that force as constant as possible so that we get full quad engagement and time under tension throughout the entire rep. For those of you at home that don't have access to a hack squat machine, or if you're on the go or whatever, I'm going to show you a great way to simulate hack squats using just a pair of 41-inch bands and a foam roller. So what you're gonna need, two 41-inch bands, drape them over your shoulders, just like such, and cross them. And then you're gonna hook one band up to each foot across the body, pulling down, stepping in, getting everything nice and even and organized here. And then we're gonna grab that foam roller and we're gonna put it behind our back, get it nice and level. And then you're gonna step out away from the wall and then lean back into the wall. It might take a little bit of experimentation to get the right angle here. And I always put that foam roller kind of right in the very low side of my back. This is the upward position. And then you're gonna squat down, nice and low, and then back up. And obviously, the closer you put your feet to the wall, the more quad engagement you're going to get, because the more knee flexion it's going to generate at the bottom of this rep. Ooh, yep. And these are awesome. Like, I love doing these. Honestly, it feels very, very similar to an actual hack squat machine, and you can do these right at home. So give these a try. Set them up a few different ways, whether you have a hack squat machine or you're just gonna do the home version. Set them up, do some experimentation. Let me know which version is your favorite. And also, if there's any questions, I know there's a lot of stuff that we covered and how to optimize and get the right stuff and the right setup. Please drop them down in the comments. We'll be happy to answer any questions below. And also, if you need any resistance bands or accessories, head over to clenchfitness.com. Furthermore, be sure to give this video a like if you found what you heard today to be useful, or you had some kind of an aha moment, or you got excited. Be sure to smash that like button. Drop us a subscribe if you want to see more of this content, and thank you for watching.